So let's talk about Alatsue, a 2021 YA verging on middle grade debut novel by Darcy Little Badger, which of course I've got all my notes on here, so we'll switch over. We'll switch over. This is a book which I almost DNF'd. Ended up sort of challenging or making me kind of one of those little hit moments where it made me aware of just my own assumptions. And while I still have a lot of problems with the book, ultimately, well, let's get into that. So yes, this is an urban fantasy novel set in a contemporary Texas, where Alatsue Ellie is a 17-year-old Lipan Apache, sorry, who can raise the ghosts of the dead. Urban, we're in urban fantasy world. She and her friend Jay, who is got his own kind of ancestry from Europe and stuff like that, are investigate the mysterious death of a cousin in the southern Texas town of Willoughby, which is seemingly controlled heavily under the influence of this very popular white miracle working doctor. So Darcy Little Badger, she is a Lipan Apache. The Lipan Apache seem to be their traditional territories is Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and the northern states of Mexico. She has a PhD in earth science, Princeton educated, and then I think Texas A&M. And this is her debut novel. Actually has another one coming out soon. So yeah, this is very much urban fantasy world where if you have trouble with the thing where it's a contemporary world, it's our world but with magic. And if you have trouble with the idea that this wouldn't significantly change history, that there was magic users in it of various types, then you'll have your usual trouble with urban fantasy. I was wondering going into this book, because her of Ellie Alatsue being a part of the Lipan Apache, is like, well, are they going to have a significantly different history? Were things, for lack of a better word, were things better for indigenous people in this United States? And it's like, no, there's definitely references to things like, the only good Indian is a dead Indian by one of the beloved presidents, much like shitty prime ministers in Canada. So yeah, no, the history is run the same way. And I can see for a book like this, you're dealing definitely with contemporary issues and stuff like that, using kind of using this magic and traditional kind of beliefs overlay. But it would be beside the point to kind of push all of that deep, vexing history to one side. It's like, no, this is part of addressing all this. So yes, and it's very much a book that builds Ellie's particular personal history into this. There's a lot of references to one of her ancestors. I think it's sixth great grandmother, and stories of how she dealt with her world at the time, and the various monsters. There is definitely monsters in this world, creatures that have ill intent towards human beings, as well as human beings who have ill intent towards other human beings. So the really great things about this book is one of the core relationship between Ellie and Jay. I just love their friendship. There's also just sort of the wonderful sense of Ellie's family and their support of their daughter, and them being a part of this adventure. That is some of the really good stuff. Now, where I almost DNF this at the very beginning, it's got to do with the language. The language it's very stiff. It's written with, if it can use a $10 word versus using a simple $2 word, it will. There's in some ways that Ellie herself is very much a geek, and that she is going to speak in a rather, maybe a little bit more formalized, a little bit more kind of uh, abstract intellectual way makes sense. But the narration does that as well, and a lot of the characters, they have a tendency to all sound they sound a bit the same. And there's also this thing of just the storytelling in it. There's an early point where Ellie goes in the water, and you're expecting kind of like maybe a rush of sensory stuff, but instead the narrative kind of veers off into giving you a little digression, intellectual digression in the middle of the action, which are all things which just like, it's I that it slightly fades as you become more fond of the characters, but I can see somebody who is more sensitive to language than I would just end up putting this book down. It's if it's a debut, if it's kind of an author who's still getting kind of their feet under them, it's got that kind of stiffness. It is definitely a book that is aimed at younger readers, and there's a lot of positives towards stopping and educating people as they go along, but it could be done much more fluently. uh, some of the most beautiful writers that English has are quote children's book authors who have gorgeous language, and this has clunky language, unfortunately, in it. Um, I was now we can kind of go into stuff where it's like, is it my problem or is it the book's problem? I very much had the feeling going through this book, Ellie is supposed to be 17. And I definitely spent a good hunk of the book going, this does not sound like a 17-year-old. This sounds like someone who is much younger, like someone who is 12. That's where you kind of get into this idea, like, is this a YA book or is this a middle grade book? Is this a book that is sort of uh, targeted at someone who's 12 versus someone who's closer to 17? I know that, like, a lot of times in entertainment for stuff like that, it's always aspirational for kids. If you have a protagonist, you always make the protagonist slightly older than the audience, because your audience is like, oh, I want to be 16, 17 and be able to drive, and sort of like that. um there's just they both Ellie and Jay both read very young to me. Now, a part of the way that I expressed this in my head, at the time, was like, well, it's like, they don't want to fuck. It's that kind of sense of like, they don't seem to have those urges, which is sort of where we get into what my base assumptions are about when at your certain age you should become a horny teenager, because what comes out in the book, in a slightly clunky wedding invitation that Ellie gets, is that Ellie identifies as asexual. So, as someone who, I guess, ace community, who does not experience sexual or sometimes romantic attraction to anyone else. Uh, and that's one of those things that sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole of doing research on that, because it's one of those things I heard of vaguely. But it's like Ellie is somebody who is a character who is not like, my base assumption is you hit a certain age, you should have sexual attraction, and I'm using that as a marker of how mature I would think the character is, which is, and different stages which I have this idea of what someone should go through, which is, if you're someone who's identifying as asexual, who says like, that is my sexuality, that wouldn't happen. So it's like, it's kind of brought me up short. It's like, well, so is that just my assumptions that are going through the thing? I think I can do a balance of the two. There's some certain things to the book, of its presentation, which seems like the presentation is very much younger. There's a bit of the adventure which feels very much like kind of a Scooby-Doo adventure. So I think there's some parts of it that the book is genuinely telling me that they're younger than they are. But there's another part where, it's like Ellie and Jay have this really great friendship, but I'm reading it as super young because it's not sexual. It's not like I want, 17-year-old kids to be like, oh, they should be banging or whatever, but I have an assumption. I have an assumption there, and that was a really interesting thing to me of going, oh, this is how I define adulthood, and that's just like that's my prejudice, my assumption that I'm going to put that on a character who doesn't have those drives. And it's like, yeah, there's a whole spectrum of sexuality, and just because there's maybe high libido and high romance and all that stuff on one side, there can be another side of being perfectly happy human being who's like, no, I like platonic relationships, or a whole variety of different things. Asexuality, if you go down that rabbit hole, if it's something that interests you, it's a lot more, it's complicated, like all human sexuality is complicated, but it's to me it seems like yeah, wow, this is a whole different side of things. And I find that really valuable, weirdly enough, in this kind of what feels to me like a very young YA book, of going like, oh yeah, there's different ways that a human being could live. There's a whole wide variety, and also just how much that says about how our society is sort of drenched in sexuality, in whether that's physical sexuality, whether that's romantic, whether that's kind of the romantic side of things. I mean, we have a whole genre which is romance. I mean, I guess we have a whole genre which is porn as well, but also how that just informs everyday interactions, how it underlines stuff, how all our entertainment kind of is bathed in that. And it's interesting, and it's kind of like, wow, it's kind of refreshing to say, well, what about somebody's experience that's outside of that? And wouldn't that be so interesting, even for someone like me, who's obviously your bog standard cis dude, to kind of go, oh, that's interesting. And yeah, just how that's interesting, and how that can actually kind of highlight just how I operate in the world. And it's like, oh, that really is interesting, which is maybe one of the reasons why I was like, okay, I definitely I kept with this book going forward. So yeah, that is kind of the big discovery in the book for me. Maybe it's a bigger discovery and a bigger interest to me than the book was as a actual constructed piece of fiction. Though, as it goes along, I do find Ellie, as this nerdy geek, is there something kind of rather endearing about that going along. And I think if a author can actually kind of create that kind of a warm feeling about her characters, that is saying something in itself. Even if you think the language isn't that hot, even if you think maybe the story kind of becomes maybe a little bit more bog simple, it's like, oh, that's like, I enjoy these characters, and it's like, oh, I'm seeing a different world. And it's funny for me, the fantastical element becomes something entirely different than the magic in there. Though the ghost dog, Ellie's ghost dog Kirby, is definitely definitely a high point in the book. But yeah. So, and also we're also getting, I getting a sense of an indigenous culture, of Lipan Apache culture in here, and getting to experience some of that as well, in a positive setting, in a kind of lighthearted, but dealing with some really dark shit. At the end of the day, she's not shying away from it. So yeah. I listened to this on audiobook, so I didn't get to experience there's like little illustrations apparently at the beginning of each chapter, which also sort of maybe points to it is targeted to a younger audience, because younger audiences are always the lucky ones who actually get illustrations in their books. And if you're a serious adult, we don't get have all this wonderful art in there. Publishers won't pay the money for that there, where they will pay for it for a younger audience, which is a shame. So yeah, she has come out with a second book. It's called A Snake Falls to Earth. It was published in 2021. which is apparently indigenous futurism. So I probably will pick that up. It'd be interesting to see if her language loosens up slightly, or if that's what we're going to continue to get with her, and I'll have to see how it goes. I believe that one is also following a younger protagonist, Lipan Apache girl again. So I guess we'll see how it goes, and whether that the language was a bit of a slog through the book. That's what I have to say. But I'm really happy with the things I did discover, because that's one of those. It's I think the best thing that can happen with a book is it can bring you up short and go, oh, I didn't think about that. And even in me being freaking, why am I'm a 50-year-old guy reading this book, but but it's I criticize the book for stopping to give you little mini lectures and educate a young audience. However, I got educated in this book a little bit and went off and did my own research, which that's the wonderful thing about nowadays. I have this little magic phone here where I can type in things and learn so much, or learn I'll learn a little bit and then learn a little bit more, and hopefully some of it will stick in there. So yeah, that was that. Oh, see if I can get my phone to click back to the pretty picture, because it does have really attractive art, including the cover there. That was my review of Latsue by Darcy Little Badger. More videos later.